In this session, we'll take a look at creating tailor-made working copies. If you recall from previous sessions, we created the many-ders empty directory. The many-ders empty directory was checked out using the depth equals empty option, and it created a working copy which was devoid of files or directories. In this first command, we're going to use the subversion list command to list the contents of the many-ders empty path. You should recall from previous sessions that the subversion ls command reports only on the contents of a repository. If we provide the list command with a path to a working copy, what actually happens is that the list command refers to the working copy directory, then using the information in the working copy makes reference back to the corresponding repository directory. In this example, the many-ders empty directory is mapped back to the trunk many-ders directory. So when we perform the list command on the many-ders empty working copy path, what actually happens is that the subversion client makes reference to the many-ders empty working copy directory, sees that it's mapped from the repository's trunk many-ders directory, and actually lists the files contained within the relevant directory within the repository, in this case many-ders. Running the command therefore lists out directory 1, directory 2, directory 3, file 1, file 2, which is exactly what we find in the corresponding directory within the repository. You'll notice that none of these directories and none of these files actually exist within the many-ders empty directory itself. Before going on, we're just going to change directory so that our current working directory is the root of our many-ders empty working copy. This next update command shows how we can build upon an empty working directory in this way. We're going to use the update command to add two subdirectories, dir1 and dir2. We know that dir1 and dir2 exist within the repository underneath the many-ders directory because the ls command that we just performed showed that they exist. So the first parameter we're providing, the dir1 parameter to the update command, is actually a relative path within the current working directory. In other words, we're asking for the dir1 directory that appears immediately under the many-ders directory, which, as you'll recall, is mapped to the many-ders empty working copy. The second parameter is actually an absolute path. We could be anywhere within our file system when we do an update to an absolute path. The subversion client will look for a working copy along the path and then use that to derive the information necessary to work out which dir2 is actually being referred to by the absolute path. In this case, again, the Subversion Guru WC many-ders empty directory is recognized as a working copy which is mapped to the many-ders directory within the repository. Consequently, the dir2 being referred to must be the dir2 that appears in the many-ders directory within the repository. Because the update command is explicitly referring to dir1 and dir2, it effectively says add these directories to my current working copy. Using the update command, we can only add those elements which exist within the repository, so we can't use this to, for example, arbitrarily map one part of a repository into a working copy. We can only use it to add elements that already exist within the repository, as in this case, the directory 1 and directory 2. Watching the update execute, you'll notice that the arguments are processed in the order that they appear on the command line. So first dir1 is added, and then directory 2 is added. You'll also notice that the output of the command shows the directories being added using either the relative or absolute path that was given on the command line. Once the command's finished executing, we can use the file manager to take a look at what's happened in our many-ders empty directory. You'll recall that previously the many-ders empty directory contained nothing but the .svn metadata which is necessary to have the subversion client recognize it as a working copy. Now, however, we've got dir1 and dir2 appearing within the working copy. These are the two directories that we've just explicitly added, and investigating their contents shows that they are fully populated with everything that they contain from within the repository. Now things start to get interesting. Running the status command reports the condition of the working copy as the subversion client sees it. In this case, we get a blank line. This means that the subversion client sees the working copy as being completely up to date. No files are missing, no directories are missing, nothing's been modified, nothing's been added. This may seem at odds with the reality of the situation. After all, we know that directory 3 is missing, we know that file 1 and file 2 are missing. However, because many dir's empty was checked out with the depth empty, and then we subsequently added directory 1 and directory 2 explicitly, the status command considers the working copy to be up to date with what we've asked it to produce. In order to see the discrepancies between the working copy and the repository, we need to use the -u option. And in order to see the full effect of this, we need to use the depth equals infinity to tell status to behave recursively. So, with this command, we're asking the status command to report recursively any discrepancies between our working copy and what it finds in the repository. Running the status command with the -u option reports all the discrepancies between the working copy and the repository. The column of stars shows that we have a number of outstanding updates in the repository which are not in our working copy. Closer inspection of these reveals that they refer to directory 3 and file 2 and file 1. It's exactly what we would expect to find, given that we know that we haven't checked those out into our working copy. The important point here is that commands like status and update will refer only to information in the working copy in the first instance. We need to provide them with additional options in order to tell them to refer back to the repository. So, performing an update in our current working directory, the many dir's empty directory, will not call upon elements like dir3, file 1 and file 2, because the working copy is explicitly instructed that those are not part of this working copy. In order for those elements to be drawn from the repository, we would need to provide the update command with additional information. The advantage of creating partial working copies in this way are considerable, particularly when you're working over weaker network links or with very large directory structures. Consider the case where you have a large and complex development with many subdirectories contained within the development trunk. It could be that as a member of the team you require access to only a certain subset of those directories. It would be quite wasteful, therefore, to create a working copy containing, say, 30 or 40,000 files, when all you need are 5 or 6 that are spread out throughout the structure. It would make much more sense to create a special working copy which contains only those directories and files that you're actually interested in. Since the update command needs to refer to all of the files within the working copy to verify that they are actually up to date with respect to the repository, limiting your working copy to only those files you're interested in obviously improves the efficiency of the update command. Finally, we'll just look briefly at the status command using different depth options. Again, reporting depth equals infinity can be quite wasteful, particularly when all we're really interested in is what's happened at the top level of the working copy. Here I'm using the depth equals files option to limit the status command to reporting only those files within the current working directory which are out of date with respect to the repository. Running the command, we see that file 1.txt and file 2.txt are out of date. We already knew this, but by specifying depth equals files, we've limited the output and therefore limited the amount of work and the time necessary for status to do its work. Similarly, in this next example, we're specifying depth equals immediates. This is the default behavior for status and will report the files and directories which are out of date with respect to the repository. Unsurprisingly, it reports file 1, file 2 and directory 3 as being out of date. But you'll notice that it doesn't recurse down into directory 3 because we've used depth equals immediates.